If you've been around the productivity YouTube space for a while, you've probably noticed a couple videos on the topics of studying more effectively. Although there are some awesome videos out there that deal with spaced repetition and active recall already, a lot of these videos deal with medicine. But outside of that sphere, I'm not seeing active recall and spaced repetition applied very well or methodically to other areas of study. But I really think that no matter what you're studying, improving your studying techniques with active recall and spaced repetition will help you. Let me explain what active recall is and what spaced repetition is. Simply put, you can really understand active recall as the how you are going to study. And you can understand spaced repetition as the when. So you have two components here, the how and the when. They're both techniques that you can implement together. You can cross these two to create a really effective study strategy. Active recall is extremely simple. In its most basic form, it is the process of asking yourself a question and then requiring your brain to answer that question. So if I ask myself, is land depreciable? I then have to think, well, is land depreciable? What's the answer to that question? If you're an accountant, you know that land is not depreciable. So that's the most basic form of active recall. A more complex form of active recall, and one that I encourage you to do, is to use practice tests to test yourself before your exams. There's tons of research that shows that testing yourself, requiring yourself to actively recall the information, is the most effective way and the most efficient way to learn new information. Okay, so remember what I said. Active recall is the how, and then spaced repetition is the when. I want to illustrate spaced repetition by talking about a upcoming exam that you hypothetically have. For me, around the 14 or maybe 10 day, let's say 10 to 14 day mark out from that exam, I'm thinking to myself that I need to really start honing in on my studying. Up until this point, what I should have been doing is going through the material or going through the coursework or the lecture notes or what have you. I'd be writing down my questions. Again, questions like, is land depreciable? And I'd be writing down all sorts of questions that are relevant to what we've been learning so far in those last, let's say, 4 or 5 weeks. So step one in this process is staying up on the material and writing down those questions as you move throughout the semester. On the first day of 10 days, I would review that material twice. I'm going to tell you right now, it may not go very well and it may be a frustrating day because the likelihood of you knowing the majority of that information is pretty low. And I think for anyone who has done a good bit of studying, they know it's just not very fun to have to go through material that you don't know. On the second day, I would say that I'm probably doing something similar. I'm probably, again, reviewing in the morning and then reviewing in the evening. Hopefully by the third day, I'm getting pretty used to these questions. I kind of have an idea of where the content's at, and I'm getting pretty decent at answering at least some of these things. So now we're on the fourth day. Remember, this is called spaced repetition. And so what we want to do is start spacing out our repetitions. On the fourth day, let's just say we're going to do 1 repetition. We're just going to do our questions in the morning. We do those questions in the morning. We leave them. We take note of how I felt about those questions. What am I at? 70%, 80%? Are there some that just seem like I am so good at them, I shouldn't even bother anymore? Take note of all of that and start to hone in on the ones that you are having a little bit more of an issue with. Now we're on to day 5, and I think you're kind of getting the point here. As you're moving along through your questions, you're going to feel more and more confident on some, and you're going to realize that you need more work on others. You need to take note of which questions are which. And the ones that you're feeling more confident on, you need to space out your repetition farther and farther. So you're feeling just like 10 out of 10 on 50% of the questions. Well, give yourself a 2-day break on those. Come back 2 days later, run through them again, keep them fresh in your mind. Okay, give yourself another 2-day break, come back to them. You don't need to keep hammering them every single day. But those questions that you are feeling less confident on, I definitely would stick with doing them once a day, until you're starting to feel that confidence come in and you can easily answer them. That's what spaced repetition is. And you can do this to any scale. If you have a massive exam, maybe back it out to the 14-day mark, maybe 3 weeks back, 21 days, whatever it needs to be. You can conquer a lot of information this way by dividing it into small chunks and then moving the pieces that you're confident with, spacing them out, and then continuing to hammer the ones that you're less confident on more frequently. I said this before, but I just want to reiterate. You need to start using this method and then tailor it to your own study habits for your own success. Every person is a little bit different, and over time you're going to realize maybe you work best on that 14-day model. Maybe you work best on that 10-day model. But that is the bread and butter of studying when it comes to that active recall and that spaced repetition. In my experience, there are 3 different types of content that you might come across, and applying active recall and spaced repetition to the different forms of content differs just slightly, but the principles are all still the same. The first type of content I would highlight are classes where it's very principle heavy. You need to learn terms or ideas and then often apply them to situations. Good examples of classes like this would be business law, philosophy classes, ethics classes, these sorts of classes where you are learning about different theories, different ideas, and then oftentimes you need to apply them in context or within short stories or things of that nature. Let's say you are in your business law class, which probably comes in your freshman or sophomore year. You are learning for the very first time what a tort is. You have no idea what a tort is. You've never heard of a tort, spelled T-O-R-T, before. And you need to start to understand not only what a tort is, but how to identify a tort. For these types of classes, I love using Quizlet. It's very simple. It's just flashcards. You write down the term, and then you're going to write down the definition. You maybe have 50, 75, or 100 terms per exam, and you're just going to start running through your definitions again and again and again and again. If you are writing down these definitions as you're going through the chapters week by week by week, and you get to that 10-day mark out from your exam, and you start hammering your flashcards, you're going to be in great shape by the time the exam rolls around. The second type of content you're going to run across are problem-based classes. This would be like accounting intermediate 1 and 2. Where pretty much the entire time, all of your homework is going to be problems from the back of the chapter, and you're just going to have to run those problems again and again and again. When I first came across this type of content, I thought, how does active recall apply to these problems? One thing I would note here is that oftentimes, professors are highlighting problems because they are going to put very similar problems on their exam. So not only do they want you to know the content, they want you to know the format. They want you to expect how the question is going to be asked. The reason for this is because CPA exam questions are asked in a very specific way. This applies to, again, Series 7 and other professional exams. They don't just write the questions in any old way. They're written very specifically. So to apply active recall and spaced repetition to this scenario, I think that spaced repetition is relatively straightforward. Again, that 10 to 14 day window, you start implementing, you start doing your problems twice a day, and then as you get more comfortable, you're sorting and pulling those problems out, and you're focusing on the ones that you are struggling with. But when it comes to active recall, I think this can feel a little bit more complicated. You will need to run these problems again and again and again in order to get, the 5, 6, or 7 steps required to get to the answer. They're complicated, they are hard, and they take time. I will say that active recall is very efficient. This is way better than any other method that you might try to attempt to learn this information by maybe reading the chapter or highlighting, etc. Cutting to the chase and just getting right to the problem work is arguably the best way to learn what you need to know. But I guess what I'm trying to say is don't be afraid of putting in the time to learn this material. In my opinion, there isn't any good way to get around problem-based coursework. You simply need to work the problems and become familiar with the format, which is so important. I feel like no one ever talks about this. The format is almost as important or more important than the problem. Apply those active recall techniques and then space out your studying over time. You will get there. Finally, some classes are going to be very essay heavy. In business colleges, I don't think you run across this as much. I think you're going to find this more in liberal arts or other majors of that nature, certainly English majors, things like that. But there are some essay requirements, particularly with the COSO framework on the CPA exams, where you're going to have to recall essay answers to essay prompts. The same principles apply here. Here's my strategy. When it comes to active recall, I like to take Quizlet or take Notion. Maybe we'll use Notion as an example here. And I will write down the essay prompt. And then underneath, I will write out my full essay answer. Let's just say it's 7 paragraphs. And the first sentence of each paragraph, I want to be something memorable. So essentially, the first sentence is the topic sentence. And that way, I really only have 7 parts to memorize. Of course, it may be 500 or 750 or 1,000 words. Essays are rather long. But having those basic headlines is going to help me break up the information and help me run with it when it's exam time. I hope that this video illustrates that active recall and spaced repetition can be used for any coursework. And it's really just up to you to apply those principles to whatever the coursework is that you're working on. It doesn't matter whether you're facing those essay questions or those problems or more principle-based classes. You can take those study techniques and apply them effectively to your scenario, which is super encouraging. You can study efficiently and effectively and see some serious improvement in your grades if you want to. If you have any questions or comments or anything of that nature, just drop it down below. I would love to chat with you and offer any help or solutions that I can. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.